When you work in a large company, it's inevitable that you're going to have a lot of files bouncing back and forth from your file servers. Now, sometimes all of this back and forth can really place a burden on your network, especially if you've got a lot of users sending files back and forth. And also, it can depend on the files themselves. Now, I remember once I was consulting for a company and they couldn't quite figure out why at random times their file server was so slow. Everything just seemed to grind to a screeching halt. Now, as it turned out, there were a couple of users that had large ISO files that they'd be sending back and forth to the file server, and consequently, it caused things to slow down. So in this video, we're going to see how we can use the Windows QoS, or quality of service, to limit the amount of bandwidth that users can use when they upload files to our file server. I will start with a small warning up front. When you start limiting bandwidth to port 445, which is the NetBIOS port in this case, you can run into some performance problems if you're being too strict with your limits. So, whilst we're happy to set low limits in our lab here, in production, just be a little careful with how you set this. Think about what a good value would be for your organization based on how much bandwidth you want to allow. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do here on our Windows server is to do a quick test to see how copying some files to this server impacts our bandwidth. So we'll go and click on Start. We'll choose Administrative Tools, and then we'll fire up the Reliability and Performance Monitor. Now over here on the left, we're going to choose Performance Monitor. And at the top here in our toolbar, we'll click this green plus add icon. From our drop-down box, we'll choose this computer. And then we're going to scroll up and we'll select the network interface. We'll expand that. And down here, we're going to choose bytes total per second. We'll click Add, and then we'll click OK. Right, now, since this is the same color as our percent processor, our CPU right now, which I'm not really interested in taking a look at, just our network performance, I'm just going to uncheck this box here so that we can only see our network performance in the graph. Okay, well down the bottom here, I'm going to double click on our bytes total per second counter, and in our scale column here, we're going to change the scale from its default of 0.0001 to 0.001. And that's one less zero in case you didn't catch the difference. Now we'll click OK. Now if you do want to save this monitor for future use, we can choose the File menu up the top here and then choose Save As. And let's just pop this on our desktop here. We'll give it a name, we'll call it Network, and we'll click Save. All right, so what we've got now is we've got a performance object that we can use to track how much network bandwidth that we're using. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go and create a share, which we'll use to remotely test copying files over the network to this machine. So we'll go and open up Windows Explorer. We'll navigate to our C drive. Well, it doesn't really matter where this share is going to be created, to be honest. So our C drive here is fine. We're going to right click. We'll create a new folder. We'll give this folder a name. I'll call it Data. And we'll right click on the folder. We'll choose Share. And in the box here, we're going to type in everyone. We'll click Add. And down the bottom, we'll click Share. Okay, well, our folder's now shared and we can access it using this UNC path. Now I've just quickly switched over to a Windows 7 machine that I've got in my lab here, and that's probably plainly obvious from the desktop. Now we're going to use this machine to copy some files over to our share that we just created on our file server. So we'll go and click Start, and we're going to fire up a command prompt. And we'll use this command prompt to copy some files over the network from this machine to our newly created remote share. So we're going to type in copy/y, and we're going to copy some files from our Windows folder. In fact, let's just do a asterisk, and we'll copy all the files across to our share, which of course was dco1/data. So this command will just copy all of the files from our Windows folder on this machine, our Windows 7 machine, over to our share. And you'll note here that I've added in this /y switch, and this just tells our copy command not to ask me to confirm to overwrite those files if they already exist in this remote share. So we're going to hit enter, and you can see, well, that copy process took probably about a second. It was pretty quick. Okay, well, I've just switched back to our domain controller here where we just copied those files, and you can see here on our graph the massive spike in network activity. And at the bottom here, in our performance monitor, there's two values here that you'll really want to pay attention to. These are the last and the maximum values. And if we're quick enough to switch over, you're going to see this last value here contain an accurate depiction of our file transfer. And in our case, of course, we weren't quick enough to see that, and you can see right now it's fluctuating between 0 and some random numbers. But over here, we could also look at the maximum values, and that should give you a story that's worthy of your attention. Okay, well, at least now, by checking these values in conjunction with our file transfers, we should have some idea what our current bandwidth looks like. So let's now go and implement a policy in our domain so that we have some control over our bandwidth. So we're going to go and click Start. We'll go to Administrative Tools. We'll fire up the Group Policy Management console. Okay, well, now we're going to, on the left here, expand our forest. We'll expand domains. We'll expand our domain. We'll right-click on our default domain policy and we'll choose Edit. Now, under our Computer Configuration heading here, we're going to expand Policies. We'll expand Windows Settings. And then we'll choose Policy-Based QoS. Now, up the top in our Action menu, we're going to choose to create a new policy. Now, we'll need to give this policy a name. So let's call this one Bandwidth Throttling. Now, for our DSCP value, we're actually going to uncheck this box here because right now we're not interested in prioritizing traffic using DSCP. Now, we will, however, check the next box here, and that'll allow us to specify our bandwidth throttling rate. So we'll need to enter in how much data will allow these file transfers to consume. So let's say, well, one's a little bit too small. Let's say 64 kilobits per second, and we'll click Next. Now, this quality of service policy is going to apply to any application, but if it is a specific one that we're interested in, we could enter in a name of that executable file here. So we'll click Next. Now we can specify that this policy will apply from any source IP address or just a specific one, and to any destination IP address or to just a specific one. So here in this window, we could lay down a blanket throttling of bandwidth, if you like, by saying, hey, we're going to go from any source IP address to any destination IP address, and that's that. In reality, though, you might want to control that a bit and say, just the guy down the hall that's doing those transferring of the large files all the time, we're going to limit him by his source IP address, and that'll leave everyone else at full speed. Or we could limit everyone, but just to this particular server. So for our lab here, we'll do that. We'll have a policy that's going to apply to everyone, but it'll only limit their bandwidth when they hit a specific server. Of course, our file server. So we're going to set the destination IP address here to 10.32.0.2, and I hope that actually is the correct IP address. 10.32.0.2, we're looking good. That's right, we'll click Next. Now here we can specify the protocol and the port numbers that we wish to throttle. Now we could throttle pretty much everything if we like, and if we don't specify any target ports, we'll be doing exactly that. But instead, we'll set our destination port to port 445, as we only want to limit the file transfers, but you could just as easily use this same policy for limiting FTP transfers and so forth just by popping all of the relevant details in this screen. All right, we're done, so we'll click Finish. And we'll want to now switch back to our Windows 7 machine and test our policy. Okay, well, I've just switched back to our Windows 7 machine. We'll now want to test that policy, but before we do, we will want to make sure that the policy is actually applying to this machine. So again, in our command prompt, we're going to use the gp update command, and we're going to type in gp update force to force that policy to update. And we're going to set the target to be the computer section of group policy, and we'll hit enter. And we can see it's updating the policy. Should only take 10 or so seconds. All right, our computer policy update has completed successfully as it says. So let's go and run that copy command again. All right, well, this time you can see it's pretty slow. At least 5 seconds have passed. Okay, 10 seconds roughly has passed, and this thing appears to be working for the government. It's going so slow, obviously we're going to be here for a while. Now, in the meantime, I've just switched over to our file server, and you can see our performance monitor. It's still going, and this time you can see our graph is showing this steady amount of network usage. And this time it's much, much slower than before. So you can see that our QoS policy is clearly working. It's clearly limiting the amount of bandwidth that this server will accept from those incoming file transfers. So in this video, we've talked about how we could use a quality of service policy to limit our network bandwidth. Now, you can be as tight as you like or as generous as you like. Ultimately, it's up to you. So we hope you've enjoyed this video, and we'd like to thank you for watching.